Please. We will begin in 2 minutes. Please silence any electronic devices and remove your proxy badges at this time. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet Second Class Rao Abdul Hanan. It's my privilege to welcome you to the Falcon Foundation Bud Breckner Lecture of the 26th Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium, made possible by the Class of 1959, our flagship supporter, the Class of 1973, the Class of 1974, the Class of 1993, the Association of Graduates, the USAFA Endowment, the Falcon Foundation, the John and Lynn Muse Educational Foundation, and many generous supporters. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. General David L. Goldfein is Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, Arlington, Virginia. As Chief, he serves as a senior uniformed Air Force officer responsible for the organization, training, and equipping of 685,000 active duty, Guard, Reserve, and civilian forces serving in the United States and overseas. As a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the General and other service chiefs function as military advisors to the Secretary of Defense, National Security Council, and the President. Prior to assuming his current position, General Goldfein was the Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, where he presided over the Air Staff and served as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Requirements Oversight Council and Deputy Advisory Working Group. Before serving as the Vice Chief, General Goldfein was the Director, Joint Staff, the Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. General Goldfein received this commission from the U.S. Air Force Academy in 1983. He is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Weapons School and is a command pilot with more than 4,200 flying hours in the T-37, T-38, F-16C&D, F-117A, MQ-9, and MC-12W. He has flown combat missions in Operations Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Allied Force, and Enduring Freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to present to you the 21st Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General David L. Goldfein.
Hey everybody, please take your seats. Thanks. Good morning. Or as they say in my great state of Texas, howdy. So that may be one of the best introductions I've ever had. I'm going to keep this cadet on retainer to do my eulogy one of these days. It's great to be back at the Academy. And especially, I want to thank Mr. John Muse and the team, the entire team who put together this symposium. How appropriate in an institution that's responsible for building warrior leaders of character that we would have this national symposium on character and leadership. And of all the things I get to do as chief, one of the things I enjoy the most is getting out and just talking to airmen. And I always ask the same question. I says, oh, hey, tell me your story. What brought you into the Air Force? And I love hearing all the different stories, right? Everything from, hey, I I want to get off the family farm, to I want to follow in the footsteps of my mom or my dad, and I get all these different stories that are just really inspirational, and somewhere in the story, almost everyone ends with, and I wanted the chance to serve. And so that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about this business of servant leadership and what I believe our nation expects of you and I as officers in the profession of arms. And I'll tell you, when I get out to talk to folks, I was out a couple weeks ago at one of my favorite forums, next to this one, of course. And it's our annual Weapons and Tactics Conference. And it's a forum very much like this. It's the Red Flag Auditorium. I know that some of the cadets had a chance to go to Red Flag just a few weeks ago. And I'm in an auditorium like this, and it's 3,000 young warriors, captains, lieutenants, NCOs, and all the four-star leadership of the United States Air Force. And there are no filters as the young warriors of our Air Force get to tell the leadership of the Air Force what they think we need to be able to fly, fight, and win. And you know, when a briefing starts, with all due respect, General, you better start squinting with your ears because you're about to learn something. And so there I am at WEPTAC, and I'm getting ready to start with this inspirational speech about war fighting and combat, and this first lieutenant walks up to me, interrupts me, and hands me a little slip of paper. And you might imagine, I'm saying like this, right? And I'm reading this, and I look at it, and it says, "Chief, we have your hat. It's in our freezer. Ransom will be paid." And I'm thinking, hey, I'm the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. You know, so you know what I did? I went and bought a bottle of scotch, brought it over there, and got my hat out of the freezer. You know, when you go to these forums, you always get a security badge, and sometimes I wear them, sometimes I don't. I figure folks probably know, if I can get into the room or not. And so I show up at WEPTAC, right, and the lieutenants and the captains, right, have done all the security badges, and of course, they hand me my security badge. This is the first one that I've actually worn the entire time. Doesn't get any better than that, right? This is part of who we are. I'm an unapologetic airman in terms of the culture that we have that's being built right here at the Air Force Academy. So as we talk a little bit about what I believe the nation expects of us as servant leaders, I think we got to start the journey and talk about the global security environment that we all live in, that you will graduate and lead in. And now, just a few months out, the class of 19, all right, you're so months from putting on those beautiful gold bars and joining the long blue line. And I, for one, can't wait to serve with you. And then, of course, we got the class of 20. So we're going to graduate together because we started together. And one of the last things I'll do as chief is come out here for the graduation of that class. And you're about to become seniors and lead this institution. And of course, we have the class of 21. Right! So you're about to become 2 degrees and take over as the NCO Corps of the Academy. And of course, we have the class of 22. Just weeks away from recognition. So the traditions of the long blue line continue. And they will continue when you graduate and join the officer corps. And so let's dig into what our nation expects of us as officers and leaders. Because I would submit to you that America is in love with its military. Our approval rating as an institution, as the profession of arms, has never been higher. But I would also submit to you that America is actually not in love with its senior officer corps. America is in love with its young enlisted, the greatest treasure in our nation's arsenal. and they expect you and I to take care of them as servant leaders. Let's go to the next slide. So the historians may challenge me on this a little bit, but I went back and looked and thought, all right, so what does 50 years look like? And when we talk about this return to great power competition, what did the class of '69 face 50 years ago when they walked across the stage, got their diplomas? Many of them graduated early because Vietnam was raging. Many of them graduated and went right into combat. And this is the world they faced back in 1969. And I did some research once as the director of the Joint Staff because we were incredibly busy with all kinds of what seemed like simultaneous world crises. And I asked the historian, I said, hey, go back in history and tell me, when were we this busy? And the historian came back and said 1968. That was the last time the Joint Staff was working so many simultaneous world crises. 1968 was actually a pretty busy year. You had Vietnam raging. We had civil rights issues going on all across the country. We had 2 assassinations that year, Robert Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King. You had the Pueblo. We had all kinds of issues going on in this country. That was a pretty busy year. And so the class of '69 graduate and went straight into combat in Vietnam. The class of 2019 may do the same. And so what does the nation expect of us in this world where we're back into the business of great power competition? And it starts with our national defense strategy. And I think General Wilson may have talked a little bit about it yesterday. But the national defense strategy tells us that there are 5 missions that you and I, have got to be responsible for executing. And they're missions that are simultaneous. First and foremost, we have to defend the homeland. If I was to ask you to close your eyes and think about your hometown, moms, dads, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, and ask you, what are they thinking about right now? I think you would tell me that they're thinking about you, church, school, roads, ground, business, economy, election, all kinds of things that make up Americana. But there's something they're not thinking about right now. They're actually not worried about getting attacked in your hometown. America sleeps very well because you and I don't. Servant leadership. After we defend the homeland, and while we defend the homeland, we're responsible for a safe, secure, effective nuclear deterrent. Some of you will graduate and you will go into our nuclear business, and we will be entrusted with the greatest weaponry on the planet. And the nation expects that on our worst day as a nation, we're able to get the commander-in-chief where he needs to be, when he needs to be there, maintain connective tissue to the leadership so he can make timely decisions, and forces in the field so he can employ the nuclear power if needed be. And is a service that's responsible for 2/3 of the nuclear enterprise and most of the nuclear command and control. This is sacred duty for us. And we do this side by side with the United States Navy. And so we defend the homeland and ensure that we have a safe, effective nuclear deterrent. And while we do those, simultaneously, we are also responsible for being able to fight and win and defeat a peer who is likely a nuclear power, a China or a Russia. And while we do those 3 things, we're also expected that there may be a rogue nation that would choose to take us on because they think we're anchored. And we have to deter them militarily while we're fighting and winning against a peer. And the last of the 5 missions that we're responsible for is to ensure we maintain campaign momentum and pressure against violent extremism. If you look at the global campaigns of the combatant commanders, you can actually pick which components will be central in every campaign. If we get engaged in a Russia campaign, it will be an air, space, and land campaign. There will be a maritime component to it, absolutely. But it will be primarily an air and space and land campaign to halt and then defeat whatever it is the Russians are trying to do. If we get into a Pacific campaign, it will be primarily an airspace and maritime campaign. There will certainly be a ground element to it, but it will be primarily airspace and maritime. If we get into a campaign against Iran, it would be mainly an air and a space and a maritime campaign. You can go across every one of the operational plans, and what you will find is that the air and the space component is central in every campaign that we're responsible for. We are a global service, and I would offer that we are a global power because of global reach. And so the nation expects us to think globally. Let's go to the next slide. This is a snapshot of what our Air Force looks like on any given day. Think about this. On any given day, 24/7, 365, a military aircraft, a gray tail, is taking off or landing somewhere on the planet every 3 minutes, delivering critical supplies or personnel where they're needed. So some time ago, a couple years ago, President Trump came into the tank, and we had a chance, each of the services had a few minutes to explain to the President what it is our service did. And so I'd like to share with you what I shared with the President and with my 5 minutes. I said, Mr. President, you know, to truly understand your Air Force, you have to look through two lenses. You've got to look through the first lens, which is, what do we do in the homeland to defend the homeland? And then the second lens is, what do we do abroad to project power globally? And what we do here in the homeland to defend the homeland starts with a nuclear enterprise. And I walked him through. Our job is to make sure that we get you where you need to be when you need to be there. And many of the decisions that you are going to make are based on indications and warnings that you will get from space. And as a service, we're responsible for 90% of the space architecture. And it's your space warriors today who are running GPS for the entire globe. It's your space warriors today who are doing the indications and warnings that you're going to need to make timely decisions. And someone, Mr. President, has to take that information, the ones and zeros, and turns it into decision quality information. And that's an entire enterprise in our ISR business that does the analytical work to discern ones and zeros into decision quality information. And it's your Air Force that has most of the analytical baseline for the decisions that you're going to make and presenting you with a common operational picture of what the globe looks like at any given time. And like our service counterparts, we're contributing in the cyber domain to ensure that not only do we defend our critical infrastructure, but also that we're able to contribute to cyber operations when you call for them. And Mr. President, if you heard jet noise this morning on your way over to the Pentagon, it was probably 2 F-16s that scrambled this morning from Andrews Air Force Base, as they do in the four corners of the globe to protect the critical infrastructure, just as our Air National Guard does 24/7, 365. Those are the missions that we do just here in the homeland. Now let's shift to what we do abroad. Every 2.5, 3 minutes, an aircraft takes off, Mr. President, to deliver critical goods to personnel where they need to be. And many of the places that we operate on are not secure. And so it's our special operators who go in and secure those locations so that we can operate in some of the bad places around the globe, and that we continue to have access where we need them. And I can't give you a better example, Mr. President, of global power than 2 B-2s that took off from Whiteman Air Force Base, flew 32 hours, had 13 air refuelings, dropped 80 precision-guided, individually guided weapons on 2 training camps in Libya, and hit their target with 100% accuracy 10 seconds from their time over target. That's what your Air Force does for you every day. And oh, by the way, just in the time it took to go through your inauguration, we took approximately 300 bad people off the battlefield in Syria and Iraq. That's what our Air Force does. You think about it. We operate from 65 feet below the surface to the outer reaches of space and everywhere in between. We operate from leaflets to nuclear and everywhere in between. So the nation expects you and I to be a global service that thinks globally and that projects global power. And that journey of servant leadership starts here at the Academy. Let's go to the next slide. Thought y'all would appreciate this. So my journey at the Academy actually had 3 phases. So the first phase started in the top left. So I was in high school at Kaiserslautern American High School in Germany. My dad's Air Force. And I'd applied for the Academy, and back before we had email, you know, I remember getting my rejection letter back, and there was all these boxes, and it says, you know, thank you for applying, you were not selected because of, and then the computer or somebody checked the squares, and every box was checked for me. And so I said, hey, all right, no biggie. My best friend in high school was a guy, he was going to the University of Wyoming. I thought that'll work for me, so I paid for my tuition, hit it out. I'm about 3 weeks from leaving to go to the University of Wyoming to study forestry, you know, and make belt buckles on mountaintops. And I get a call from some guy, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, at the admissions office at the Air Force Academy. And he says, hey, we just tracked you down. We haven't heard back from you. Are you going to take the Falcon Foundation scholarship that we've offered you? I said, nobody's ever contacted me. I don't know anything about it. And he says, well, this is a Falcon Foundation. It'll take you to prep school. We think maybe that you have potential if we can just get your grades up above a 1.9. And so we'd like to, you know, give you this opportunity. I said, well, listen, I appreciate it, but I'm going to the Air Force. I'm going to the University of Wyoming. I'm going to study forestry with my best friend, so thanks, but I'm already committed. He says, you're sure? I said, absolutely. I'm sorry, I'm committed. So I turned it down. I went home that night, and I'm sitting there in the kitchen. I remember my dad's reading the newspaper, you know, Stars and Stripes, and I tell him about this conversation. I said, oh, I got this wild conversation, you know. And so he folds the newspaper, I remember, and he puts it down, and he says, okay, I just got to make sure I have this right. He said, someone called you today and offered you money to go to school, and you told them, no, you'd rather use my money to go to school. So, you know, they have this saying that says, you know the moment that you lost situational awareness, right, which is the second you get it back, right? So I said, Dad, I hadn't thought about that. But he goes, yeah. He goes, you know what? I think we need to make a phone call. So we did, and luckily the scholarship was still there. So I came into the Air Force Academy, and my older brother, who's class of '78, was a senior and was graduating, and he was the cadet wing commander. And he had restricted the class of '81 for 4 weekends in a row for gazing and other terrible things that they were doing as a class. And then they became upperclassmen, and I arrived. And I had no idea that my name was actually pronounced Goldfein. Drive on out here. Give me 20. And so I share that story with you because, you know, some of you are on different parts of this journey. But I came to the Academy under those auspices, and if you're trying to forge your own way in the world and your older brother is perfect, the only avenue available to you is to be anti-perfect. So I fought this institution, and I fought it for 2 years. We're going to go have lunch today, and I'm going to go up and have a chance to go up in the staff tower, and it's going to be that staff tower I'm going to stand at today where Cadet Goldfein actually stood and sung a song I wrote back as a freshman called Go and Act Pro. Yes, several tours later after that one. But my point to you is some of you may be fighting the institution. So what turned it around for me? We made a mutual decision that probably I needed to go take some time and get my act together. So I left the Academy. And I wanted to pursue my passion in music at the time, so I got a job as a roadie for a guy named Harry Chapin. And I was going to join him to make my way in the music business, and he had a tragic accident, and so I'm on a 10-speed bicycle traveling around the country on my own for a year. And oh, by the way, I wanted to put that top left picture in there because that's my high school sweetheart who then, we got married a day after graduation, so it can be done. And this year, by the way, we became grandparents. 2 granddaughters, class of 2040. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I'm traveling around the country, and here was the experience. total strangers would pull over and say, hey, tell me your story. Need a place to stay tonight? Need a meal? And total strangers across the country for a year of traveling on a bicycle with my dog, by the way. I don't know if you can see that's traveling there with me, would take me in. And I came to the conclusion over the course of this year is that this nation is worth defending. And the Academy let me back in. And my last 2 years were a completely different experience. What changed? I actually didn't study on that year that I was gone. What changed was I embraced what this institution stands for. And I started actually working towards being a servant leader and fulfilling the obligation of being a member of the profession of arms. And the entire experience of the Academy changed for me. Most of the cadets are probably on one stage of this journey. I don't know how many of you are growing a beard and riding a bicycle, but you're probably on some stage of this journey between resistance and embracing. And I would just offer to you, as a guy who's been through both, the last part was a lot more fun than the first. This business of servant leadership is much bigger than any of us. And so what I want to do now in the remaining time is to sort of walk you through some personal stories of individuals who have inspired me and have helped develop my leadership philosophy that I'd just like to share with you. So let's go to the next slide. This is my first squadron commander, Billy Deal. So I'm a brand new, young F-16 pilot at Shaw Air Force Base, and we are getting ready to go to war in Desert Storm. And I'm like every one of you will be, going into combat for the very first time, because we hadn't fought since Vietnam. I'm wondering to myself, am I ready? Have I been trained enough? Am I going to have what it takes? How am I going to react the first time I actually see the enemy? That's what we all go through and have gone through since the first class graduated from here and since we became a service. Everyone wonders the same thing. So who is it that prepares us to make sure that we are ready? And the answer is our leaders, and that's you and I. My first experience in combat going across the line, so here Billy Deal was a MiG killer from Vietnam. He was the only one that had combat experience. The rest of us were all green. And I remember going across the line for the first time, and there was a radio call that came over as we crossed into Iraqi airspace for the first time. I'm in enemy airspace with my teammates for the very first time. And as you might imagine, my heart rate's up, the adrenaline's going, and my head's on a swivel, and I'm looking around, right? And across the radio comes my squadron commander, and he's like smoking a Lucky, right? By the way, I got to explain that, by the way, because I've understood that smoking a Lucky is a generational term. That's a World War II term for just chilling out, right? So here comes General Deal, or Colonel Deal, and he says, there's AAA, anti-aircraft artillery, right 2 o'clock. And 40 F-16 pilots, plus all the other aircraft. I mean, we hear this, and he's just like a walk in the park. And we all look over and we stare, and there it is, AAA, just like we heard about. Little pops of smoke, right? And we're all staring at it. And then in the same calm radio call, he says, SA-2, left 10 o'clock. Take a look. And so we sure enough, there's this telephone pole that's been shot from below, and we can actually see it because it's a large missile, and it comes and explodes about 30,000 feet above us. And I remember watching it going, man, that's a surface-air missile. And then just shortly after that, I hear this radio call comes up, and he goes, splash, MiG-29. And I look up because I was in the front of the formation as the deputy mission commander, and I look up, and I'm far enough in the formation, and I see a big fireball hit the ground. I will forever remember that moment in my cockpit, because here's what I realized. This is not new. I have actually heard these radio calls. I've seen Smoky Sam simulators. I've seen AAA simulators. I've heard these. Never saw an airplane hit the dirt before. But everything else I had seen, because my commander had put me through the ringer at a Red Flag at Nellis Air Force Base. And you can't imagine the confidence that came over my cockpit when I realized I've been here before. I know what this is all about. And we went and we prosecuted our target. 10 years later, I got to be a squadron commander of my own squadron and took them into combat in Kosovo and Serbia. And on the first night, we go in, and I came back, and I pulled everybody together. I said, "What did you think?" And they said, "Man, it's just like Red Flag." I thought, feedback. As leaders, as servant leaders, we'll do the best we can at a lot. But here's one where I would offer to you is nothing short of a moral obligation. As officers, we have to make sure that every airman that we send into harm's way is properly organized, properly trained, properly equipped, and properly led to get the mission done. And when they come home to their families, we've taken care of them while they're gone. Everything else, we do the best we can. That one, you and I got to get right. Servant leadership. Next slide. This is John Chapman. Hopefully you all have heard the story of John Chapman. Recently, this year, presented the Medal of Honor. This is a picture of John Chapman the day before his last mission on Earth that earned him the Medal of Honor. And here's how the story goes. So they were going into a safe house before this operation, and the safe house was a family, and the Afghan commandos were going in, and they were actually pulling the family out of this safe house so they could use it before they go in for this operation the next day. And John Chapman said, "No, there's only one room in this house with heat, and that family needs to stay here, and those kids need to stay here." And the Afghan commandos said, "No, that's not the way. That's not our ROE. That's not what we do. We got to move them out." And he says, "No, they're going to stay here." And he went up and he grabbed this little girl, and he pulled her in and put her on his lap. And this picture was taken. And the Afghan commandos realized they were not going to force this family out of their home. And so this, to me, represents not only the humility of our warriors, but also the fact that America expects you and I to take our values with us when we go into combat. We go to war with our values. So look at the difference here. This is a man, by the way, this young girl that he has on his lap is the exact same age as his daughter at home at the time when this picture was taken. And so here's one of our warriors who can on one day have the humility, the grace, and the personality to be able to bring this family together and keep them in a heated room. And the next day bring incredible violence alone on a mountaintop that saved the lives of his teammates. John Chapman's picture hangs over my office as the chief. And I would offer to you as servant leaders, these are the men and women that you and I have the privilege every day of leading. And we ought to be working every day to make sure that we're worthy of that gift. Next slide. You have a chance here to work with enlisted leadership. You're going to have enlisted leaders who are entrusted to your care. And this is my first chief, Chief Jimmy Kelly. And I was a young squadron commander, and I hadn't had a chance to work with the chief before, and we just forged this incredible partnership. And oh, by the way, you had a chance to meet with another incredibly inspiring chief yesterday, Chief Wright, who's here today. I get to make a lot of personnel decisions as the chief. That one is the most important decision I will ever make. And I would just say, I think we got that one about right, don't you think? Chief and I just went through the AOR on a trip over the holidays, spent holidays with the troops, and we learned some. I didn't know this. I didn't know this. Maybe you know that, but Chief Wright looks really good on the top of a Christmas tree. I don't know if you all know that. But this is Chief Jimmy Kelly. And Chief Jimmy Kelly taught me 100 things about leadership, but there's one lesson that he taught me that I want to share with you. He walked in one day and he did the old, fingers around the door, chief in there. He goes, "Hey, sir, you got a minute?" Which, of course, the answer is always, "Absolutely, chief, come on in," right? He came in, shut the door, walked in, looks at me, and he takes the box out, and he hands it to me, and he puts it on the desk, and he says, He says, sir, he goes, you know what? He said, that ought to make you mad because it makes a lot of your airmen mad. And I looked at it and I picked up the box and I stared at it and I turned it around and I looked at it and I said, Chief, I don't know, I'm not getting it. What are you trying to teach me here? And he said, well, read the box. I said, Johnson & Johnson, flesh-colored Band-Aids. He said, yep. He said, that ought to make you mad because it makes a lot of your airmen mad. And I took at it and I stirred it and I looked around and I kept looking at it. I opened the box, I looked at it, I said, Chief, I'm adult, I'm not getting it. What are you trying to teach me here? And he said, I'm gonna show you this. And he took out a Band-Aid and he ripped it open and he took out this pink Band-Aid and he put it on his skin. And of course it showed him like a beacon. And he looked at it and he goes, you know what? He goes, that ought to make you mad because it makes a lot of your airmen mad. And he sort of winked and walked out. Flesh-colored Band-Aids. What's the lesson? I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it. There was no way, right? My whole life, what other color would a flesh-colored Band-Aid be? I actually have never walked into a room in my life that I can remember and been the only one of me. Most rooms I walk into are full of people that look like me. I've actually never been the only woman in a room. To have, but think about this. I've never had everything I've said be scrutinized to a completely different degree and have people say things to me that they think they're just joking, perhaps, that are actually quite degrading. It's never been that experience for me. I've never been the only African American, Asian American in the room. I've never been, most of my life experiences that have framed my view of the world and my ability to see the things that are going on, most of my life has been part of the majority. But yet I'm your Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And I have to be a role model for all of us. And I couldn't see what the chief was trying to tell me. And I could have sat there for weeks and stared at that box, and I would never have seen it. So as leaders, our nation expects us to build a culture that celebrates diversity as a warfighting imperative. And it's a warfighting imperative because the challenges we face back on that map I showed you are wicked hard, are really complex. And we need all of us thinking together to come up with the creative solutions that we're going to need to offer the commander-in-chief if we're going to solve the challenges that we have been given on that map. And so as we go out into the world and you graduate and become leaders, and as you are leaders in this institution, I would offer to you that part of leadership is acknowledging, first off, that there are flesh-colored Band-Aids in our organization. And we can't see them. And if we assume that everything is just working perfectly through the lens that we looked at, we're going to miss a lot of things that are going on. Our organization, our institution, this profession of arms has to be inclusive. Has to make sure there's room for all of us. Our culture has to embrace all of us because it's a warfighting imperative. And our nation expects that of us as leaders. And so one of the ways I've found to get after this is surround yourself with those who can see the flesh-colored Band-Aids that you can't see. Think of how you build your teams as a leader and make sure that you understand what's going on in your organization. Next slide. Every Friday morning, 800 young men and women cross the parade ground at Lackland and become airmen and are then entrusted to our care. And the first time I went to Lackland and saw a BMT graduation, I was a brigadier general. And I sat in the stands, actually I was officiating, and I remember sitting there looking out at that parade ground and sort of beating myself up a little bit going, man, how can I have gotten to the point where I'm a brigadier general? I've been leading airmen my entire career, and I'm now for the first time seeing where they're produced. And on that parade ground, what I saw when I walked out and shook their hands and congratulated them was unlimited hope. You know, hope for a great career, hope for my family, hope for dessert that night for the first time. Hope was on that parade ground. And I went back to my wing at Holloman Air Force Base, and I grabbed all my squadron commanders and I said, mandatory field trip. We're all going to Lackland. I took every one of my squadron commanders on a field trip to Lackland. And I gave them a test question. I said, here's your test question. We're going to talk about it on the way home. What you're going to see on that parade ground is unlimited hope. And your test question is this. How do so many of these incredible airmen who start with hope transition on our watch to hopeless? How do we lose so many airmen to domestic violence, to sexual assault, to suicide? These are the young men and women who have been entrusted to our care. And the parents of America expect us to take care of them. And yet we're losing too many on our watch. And so I would offer to you that America expects us to be leaders with humility, that understand that leadership is a gift. And that leadership is a gift that's given to us by those we're privileged to lead. And when we ever start thinking that we're entitled because of rank or position or privilege, we start losing our way as an institution. Trust and confidence that we enjoy today from the American people is not so much for what we do. It's for the torch that's been handed to us by those who've gone before. And now we have a sacred charge to preserve this institution, the United States Air Force, and hand it on to the next generation stronger than we received it. Next slide. We're responsible for the ultimate high ground of air and space superiority. And on the left, what you see is a picture of what it looks like when we have it. And on the right is a picture of what it looks like when we don't. And you and I have an obligation to our joint teammates and our allies and partners. When they hear jet noise, they should never look up because they know it's us. And they can focus on the enemy because we got their six. We are their top cover. And the ultimate high ground is space superiority. And we're in a national level debate and discussion, which I believe is very healthy, on the future of space. And when you and I walk into the room and someone sees an airman, they actually don't know, for the most part, most of American people, and even our joint teammates, they actually don't know what our badges mean. They don't know whether these are flying wings or space wings or manned wings or unmanned wings or cyber wings, or they don't know, they don't really care. We care, it means a lot to us. What they actually see is U.S. Air Force. And what they expect is that we understand how to deliver air and space superiority. And so, as an institution, I'm asking us all, whenever I travel, have we embraced culturally space superiority with the same level of passion that we embrace air superiority? Because I would offer to you, as servant leaders, our nation expects it of us. Next slide. So these are three airmen that mean a lot to me. Some of you may know that I'm one of those pilots in the Air Force that has an odd number of takeoffs and landings. I brilliantly intercepted an enemy missile with my aircraft. You know, somebody asked me one time, they said, you were supposed to do suppression of enemy defenses, not depletion of enemy defenses. And so I found myself, you know, in the worst situation, right, all alone in enemy territory, miles inside of Serbia. And my life depended on these three guys. Staff Sergeant Andy Kubik in the middle there, Jeremy Hardy on his left, and Ronnie Ellis on his right. And they were actually playing spades in a hut in Tuzla when they got the word over the radio that a pilot was down. And they did what they were trying to do. They raced out to their helicopter, they spun it up, they jumped in, and they came out, and they went out looking for this guy. And you know, our nation was not going to sleep that night until they brought one of theirs home. And so as most rescues go, you know, for me, you know, once I got out of the airplane and I found myself on the ground, I raced, grabbed all my stuff, ran to the nearest tree line, you know, and I thought this tree line was just sort of this, you know, I was going to run into the tree line and sort of get my act together. And I thought maybe it was this, you know, this easy run I could do into the tree line. It turned out to be a cliff, and I fell forward, and luckily I had my raft, right? I fall forward on my raft, and I ride like Indiana Jones, right, down to the bottom of this tree line, right? I get to the bottom, and now I'm collecting all my gear, and I make a radio call, and I say, hey, I'm okay, I'm on the move. And as I moved forward to get to a higher terrain, I hear voices. And I hit the deck, and I remember reaching for my 9mm because 3 folks, Serbians, that were out looking for me, started walking right towards my position. And I reached for my 9mm because I was not going to get taken that night. And as I reached for it, I realized during the ejection, the 9mm had left me. So some Serbian kid right now has got this really nice 9mm Beretta. But you always wonder, could you do it? Could you at close range execute that kind of combat operations as an airman? Now I was shot down in 1999. I went through Syria here at the Academy in 1979. You can do the math. What happens in our training is we compartmentalize so that we can call forward what we need the moment we need it. And I will tell you that that training that I went through right here at the Academy came right back. And there was no hesitation if I had that 9mm that I could use it if I needed to. And I worked my way to high terrain, and I thought everything was great. And we had this guy who was actually jumped out of an airplane during Desert Storm, and he was on the ground for 6 hours. And while he was waiting and he was hiding under his raft in this low wadi, he would keep his sanity by reaching out from under his raft, reaching out, and he would grab rocks, and he'd pull them underneath his raft, put his raft back down, take out his infrared flashlight, and he was sorting through the rocks, picking out the good ones for his kids as souvenirs. And I remember him debriefing me that night, and I thought, man, now that is Father of the Year. You know, picking out rocks for your kids in enemy territory, how cool is that, right? So now, here I am. I'm waiting for a rescue. I got time on my hands, so I'm picking up rocks, right? And so I got this little pile of rocks, right? And I'm sorting out the good ones for my daughters. And all of a sudden, I hear footsteps in the ravine behind me. And I remember thinking, damn, I can't believe that they have found me at 2 o'clock in the morning in this ravine. And as I'm listening to the footsteps, I realize that it's breaking branches, but it's not a human. It's probably maybe either it's a child or it's an animal. And it starts moving its way right up towards me. And it gets to the point where it's, you know, well inside my personal space. So I grab this pile of rocks I've been collecting for my kids, and I throw it at this thing, and it rears up on its hind legs, and it growls at me. And I will tell you, Jesse Owens could not have kept up with me as I left that perfect spot, right, for my next one. And while I am convinced to this day that that was a Serbian mountain lion or grizzly bear, I will tell you my fellow fighter pilots are absolutely convinced it was a Serbian field mouse. You know. And then the helicopter comes in, it lands, and you know, they teach you, as they teach you in Syria, right? You're not supposed to be, you're supposed to be passive, don't show them a weapon, hold back, have authentication procedures, right? Well, as soon as the helicopter landed, enemy opened fire because they had been out there searching for them, and they were in close proximity, and they started raking the trees and the helicopter and everybody with gunfire. So I started running to the helicopter. I meet Andy Kubik and Jeremy Hardy, and our total authentication that evening was, let's go. And I jump on this helicopter, and these guys now, they're 3 pretty good-sized guys. They got full body armor, head to toe, and I've got none on. And they push me to the floor, and they all climb on top of me because they've got body armor and I don't, and they need to protect me. These are the airmen that we're privileged to lead. And we take off, and I'm thinking, man, these guys are heroes. these guys are big. These guys are awesome. And then it occurred to me, we're getting shot at from below. Maybe I'm body armor for them. So we land back at Tuzla, you know, give a big hug, and then I jump on a C-130 and back into Aviano, and then was able to get back in the air the next night. And these guys get a bottle of scotch from me. The rescue teams that rescued me get a bottle of scotch from me every year on the anniversary. Single malt, good quality. They are praying I live a long and healthy life. And this year marks the 20th anniversary. And I share this story with you because, you know, as officers, here's what we don't ever know. You and I, we don't know it. We don't know when in our career someone's going to risk everything they hold dear to pull us out of bad guy land or a burning vehicle or some terrible predicament. And they're going to risk their lives for us. And the question for us to think about is, on that moment, on that day, are we worthy of that risk? I don't have many things I can offer to you as chief with absolute clarity, but this one I know with 100% accuracy. You and I have from right now until that moment to prepare. And every week counts. And we got to treat every week of peace as an absolute blessing. And we've got to remember that those that we're privileged to lead look to us to be servant leaders, not entitled leaders, but servant leaders. And we learn that here at the Academy. We learn that with our honor code. You learn that with the positions that you're privileged to fill. You learn that with the young cadets that are entrusted to your care. You learn that with the NCOs that become your mentors. And I would end with this. Go to the final slide. We can never forget that as the profession of arms, it's our job to ensure that we can fight and win our nation's wars. And that we're always looking towards the future. This is a fascinating quote to me. Read that for a minute. So think about 1946, right? So Hap Arnold here, he's just come out of winning the most decisive war in history. And he looks at the Army Air Corps and makes this statement about the future. How right he was. Let me make a prediction about our future. Wars in our future will be fought in all domains. Our job as a global service that brings global vigilance and global reach and global power is to think globally. As a service that operates from 65 feet below the surface to the outer reaches of space, that is responsible for all the missions I laid out for the presidents, from leaflets to nukes and everything in between. We've got to think about the future of warfare and how we bring our advantages to bear. I often tell the folks who ask me, tell me about the F-35 versus the, you name the weapon system. And I say, hey, listen, I mean, that's a 20th century discussion. Because here's the future of warfare. If the adversary actually ever sees an F-35, I want to simultaneously, which is highly unlikely, I want to simultaneously change all their screensavers. And I want to put two words that show up. We're here. Not I'm here. We're here. We've been here in space. We've been watching you. We know what's going on. There's nothing you could do about it. You can't place a block of wood over your country. The best you got is a block of Swiss cheese, and there are holes there, and I know where they are. And it's my job to understand that It's our job to make sure that we can exploit those holes, get in, and hold targets at risk, and there's not a darn thing the enemy can do about it. We're here in space. We're here in high altitude, and we've already penetrated. We've been persisting over time. We've been watching you. We know what you're up to, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. We're here on the ground with a Special Forces team. We got a Marine Air Ground Task Force that's there. There's an Aegis cruiser that's already part of this team. There's a submarine that's already penetrated. It's already there. We are here in all domains, and we are going to give you so many dilemmas that there's no way you can ever counter us. And so don't take us on, because that's deterrence, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of the day, you and I are responsible for putting military capability into the hands of the Secretary of State and our diplomats to negotiate to a better peace. And if they are unsuccessful, to prosecute our nation's campaigns and win. And to be able to do that to the level that our nation expects requires us to be servant leaders. That's the journey that you're on. And I, for one, as your chief, can't wait to serve with you. Fight's on. Thank you very much.
General Goldfein, thank you for your message, sir.
Thanks.
At this time, I would like to open the floor for questions. I will announce last question as we approach 2 minutes remaining in the session.
General Goldfein, sir. Yeah. Cadet 4th Class Cason Radar Couch of Cadet Squadron 21.
Hey, Radar. Did I give you that name?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think I did. Thanks for sending me that email.
Yes, sir.
How'd that go, by the way? Did
Went
you use
amazing,
it?
sir. Thank you so much for participating in that.
Is the call sign sticking?
Hopefully, sir.
Well, you got it from the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I'm hoping it sticks.
Yes, sir. Sir, my question is, do you have any lessons that you wish that you had been taught at the academy that maybe you didn't learn going into the Operational Air Force before commissioning, that, or advice for the firsties right now as they're about to leave that you think would have, I guess, benefited you, things you wish you had known coming out of this place?
Yeah, thanks, Radar. I would say, I'll give you two. Number one, I wish it hadn't taken me so long to change my attitude here, because I think I actually missed out on a lot in my first 2 years, quite frankly. While I was fighting the institution, you know, I look back on that, and there were a lot of things that I think I could have really enjoyed. And so the question is, how much more would I have learned had I embraced the institution earlier, right? That's number one. And the second, and that's why I share with you that, you know, for everyone that's part of your journey, and oh, by the way, for all of you, if you do one thing, take this homework assignment from your chief, go back to your squadron, right, and find the cadet that's fighting it, and go sit down and say, hey, why are you fighting it, right? Join us. We need us. We need you. The second thing I would offer to you is that I would say I learned it here, but it was reinforced for me over time that the foundation of successful leadership is character. We are expected to be leaders of character because when we go to war with our values, we stand for something. I'll give you two quick examples. So we're the service in 2014 that simultaneously delivered 2 precision-guided packages in Iraq. It was at Sinjar Mountain, and the Yazidis were under siege at the top of a mountaintop by ISIS that was at the base. And we delivered simultaneously 2 precision-guided packages, humanitarian relief with water supplies and goods to the people under siege, and then precision-guided weaponry to those who were attacking from below. That's who we are. We go to war with our values. Our airmen that you will be entrusted with are way too smart. Unless you got an Oscar somewhere on your shelf, they'll see right through a say-do gap in leadership, right? Character is about who we are. It's about it's about the decisions we make when no one's watching. And so I learned that at the Academy. I will tell you that I relearned it and embraced it more as an officer.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Radar.
Sir, Cadet 4th Class William Rayner.
And Cadet 4th Class Trey Shuford from Squadron 27.
Yeah, tag team, all right.
We're both Eagle Scouts, and we know that you are as well, and
Yeah.
that's created so many different opportunities for us and really helped shape our lives in very significant ways.
Yeah.
And we wanted to know, in what ways has it really shaped your leadership style, as well as could you sign this picture of you at Philmont Scout Range from 1980?
Yeah. I'd be honored to. Yeah. So I'll tell you a real quick funny story. So when I was promoted to colonel, my dad did my swearing in, right? Because you redo the oath at every promotion. The same one that you all took together, by the way, that I stood in the same field house and took with Cadet 4th Class Heather Wilson, my classmate, right? And we also sort of joke, you know, we say, how did the class valedictorian and the class clown grow up to be the Chief and Secretary of the Air Force, you know? I mean, right? So we're at my colonel promotion, and my dad is going to swear me in, and he completely forgets the oath. And he decides, you know, rather than, you know, ask somebody for help, he just makes one up. And so I'm standing there, and he starts something. He goes, he says, and I promise to be trustworthy, loyal, and reverent. So, I promise to be trustworthy, loyal, and reverent. You know, and then at the end of the day, he says, you know, and be a great officer. And I said, and obey the laws of the pack. You know, and so you know that oath that you take as an Eagle Scout, you never know. You may get a chance to use it someday. You know, if you think about it, though. The ideals of being an Eagle Scout are all about character as a foundation of leadership, and it's about what we've been talking about today. So the two, I think, go hand in hand. And I'd be honored to sign that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. Sir, thank you again. On behalf of our 2019 NCLS participants, the Cadet Wing, and the faculty and staff of the Air Force Academy, we would like to present you with a small token of our appreciation.
Oh, thanks. The traditions continue. Thanks. Awesome. Thanks, bud. So I always carry one coin with me for a good reason. There you go. Well
Thank
done.
you, sir.
Thank you. Good job.
I'll take that, sir.
Okay. So come join us. Your nation awaits leaders of character, servant leadership. It's who we are. And I, for one, can't wait to serve with you. Congratulations. Fight's on. Thanks. Carry on, everybody. Thank you.